yourself. Bow before Dark Dragoon, ruler of the sky.
Alrighty, I want to say thank you for joining me. I finally worked out some of the technical issues I was having, and this is going to be one of my first attempts to give you a little bit of audio on the choices and decisions I'm making over the course of one of these games. I'd like to introduce you to our Do Nothing Forest deck, courtesy of the new Unkilling cards in the new expansion. Obviously, Forest doesn't feel very strong at the moment, but we're trying to get a feel for where we could go in the future and see if we can get something of a working deck, even if it is going to be a little bit different from Forest decks that we've seen in the past. If you pay attention, you'll notice it's actually not too far off from some of them. It's just missing a little oomph at the end. So just to get started here, obviously we don't want to have a lot of do nothing in our opening hand, especially not, a game starting on turn 6. So let's pitch these and see if we can't get a better start going here. Alright, so we've got 2 2-drops and a 5-drop and a 6-drop, all out of 3 cards. That's actually pretty impressive considering we only have 3 cards in hand. Godhunter Selwyn, obviously being a flex pick here, he can go for the 2 or the 5. I'm still a little bit concerned about his place in the deck. He can be a little bit cloggy at times. I'm not running enough low drops to be able to combo him effectively. That's one of the things I'm going to have to change if I keep him. And some of the times he just feels very awkward to sit in our hand, especially if we draw multiples. However, there's still situations in mid-game and late game where even just being a ward is incredibly useful. So he's going to be a card to watch as this deck continues to grow. I don't want to cut him necessarily just yet, but I do want to pay close attention to how often we're using him and how often we need him, because he's in an awkward place. We'll see how that happens. But on the bright side, we do have a 2-drop that's a board and something on board, and now we've got a second Godhunter, so we can use one each way if we choose to. My hand is quickly filling up with 5-drops, which scares me a little bit. But being that we're playing a control forest, we don't necessarily mind holding onto cards in hand as long as we're not completely punting the board. 4 5-drops in hand, however, scares me a lot. Gives me some concern depending on what his next few turns look like, especially if he starts ramping like there. 5-drop number 5. Seems like we're getting off to a great start for our inaugural run with this deck. Our first non-5-drop. This guy is actually pretty good. I'll take a moment to talk about him for a second. The putting a random spell into our hand. A lot of people are going to try and hand pick which spell they want with this one and specifically use it to get that. In this case, you see in my hand I already have Mark of the Unkilling. But just as a card advantage card, he's not terrible. The 3/5 stat is so-so for a 5-drop. It's decent, not great. But the card to hand really matters a lot for Forest, both in having resources and thinning the deck. And the end of turn gaining life is actually extremely relevant to Forest in this kind of deck. You don't want to get terribly low, and this guy's a nice little pick-me-up in games where you leave creatures on board and force him to deal with them. It matters over the course of the game to have a card like this. So I definitely don't want to cut this guy yet. He seems to be the best performing of all the Unkilling cards so far.
Hope for continuation.
It's so cold. You won't even be able to tremble.
For growth and decay. Hope for continuation.
Rescuing people's a hobby of mine.
Now it seems like we can't get any of our other 1-drops. But that's okay. If he wants to burn resources on my middling guys, I don't mind keeping options in hand.
Oh, come on!
I will stop and take a moment to point out that this mark here, the Mark of Unkilling, yes, you look for ways to get the combo synergy for it, but just being a 6-drop banish is not terrible. That's one of the things that made me really stop and consider this deck, given that in previous iterations of Forest, we've already had Banish and Transform effects. Paying 6 for a Banish in a format where there's lots of single threat creatures that can be really difficult. It's not a terrible card. Obviously we want to get the 0 when we can. But don't count it out just because you're not playing it for 0. I do think the numbers might need to come down on it a bit depending on tech, but we'll see how it pans out. At the moment, he's not playing any single target threats for us to worry about going for the banish, so we'll get some cards out of our hand and make him use more resources. And that brings up another point. You notice I just drew a Whispering Woods. This is another card that's actually working out very well for me lately. I think this is eventually going to replace Venus as a card of preference for a lot of people. Obviously, you're not getting the body that Venus gets, but it does something that Venus doesn't, and that's conserve board space. You know, the biggest issue that you have with Venus is that her amulet will sit on the board until the end of the game unless you use some kind of bounce or removal to get rid of it yourself. And that can hurt a lot of forest play depending on what you're running. This guy, you know, he comes in, he gives you what this deck wants, a one-turn, you know, you do nothing effect, do nothing forest. But then it pulls 3 cards from your deck, improving your draws later, or getting you exactly what you need depending on what creatures it pulls. And then it goes away. You don't have to worry about removing it yourself or it taking up board space for something else. You know, we don't have terribly often where we worry about going with the full 4 on God Hunter for the board space to matter, but it is nice that it does its job and goes away, whereas Venus, you're often left with an amulet that can really muck up your later plays.
I'll swallow you whole.
Don't come closer.
So once again, our servant of the Spellgrove, mostly just acting as a speed bump. If he wants to use resources on it, we're happy with that. If he doesn't use resources, he's going to screw up some of his combat math next turn. And he really kind of incites a lot of people to just waste resources on something that's inconsequential.
The stars pale beside me.
So now that he's walked handily into a nice Cassiopeia, we'll get that going. And I do want to point out the Chronos that we've just drawn. Given the state of the game, even though our normal win condition here would be to drop Chronos to mill somebody to death, we picked him up as Storm Dragon, and right now we have a significant card advantage lead on him. I mean, 3 cards plus whatever we get off of the amulet. We're probably not going to play him for a while, even though that's our plan A. The way this game is going, we don't want to give him easy access to the rest of his deck. Just giving him a bunch of storm cards is a quick way for us to die. So we're going to play the resource game here, see if we can whittle him down, stay alive, and then just win with whatever creatures survive on board.
Wretched place. I'll trample all over it. Tear away from your place and fly beneath me. I'll show you this thing. Exactly what I want. I am the god tree.
Glad to get some life gain here. Obviously we want to stay above some ridiculous storm totals. Azidahaka for 8 would have been really rough there, especially with him having that Evo still available. And more resources from his hands, so. There's the all-in, bringing me to 1. So now we just have to stabilize, hope that he doesn't find that last damage, and get ourselves back on board. Ooh, hurts losing that drain there, though.
I'll tear through your spirit and heart.
And here's where I was talking about Selwyn coming back to really show his colors. He was awkward for the entire game, but now that we're low in life and he's looking for that last few points, that ward is really strong, and the removal that comes with it. So, however awkward he may seem at first, I'm not keen to just drop him. I might have to tune the deck a little bit, get some more low drops to combo him more often, but I'm pretty happy with him so far.
Is infinite.
Burning flames will freeze. You won't even be able to tremble. It's so cold.
The curtain rises for a new era.
So here we're just going to state that we are officially going all in. We've got a commanding presence on board. He's got one card left in his hand. He's obviously in top deck mode. I've got a ward to protect myself. We're probably going to finish him next turn, and heaven forbid if not next turn, the turn after. But doing this now gives us access to cards when we need them most, and prevents him from getting cards in time to really turn the game. So, dropping Chronos now I think is a safe thing, just to give us a few more options, get stuff out of our hand, and make sure that we're able to close effectively.
I admit defeat.